the people that she organized and wrote with, to recognize that white supremacist, terrorist violence at the hands of the police and at the hands of white supremacist vigilantes, and those are often the same people, that violence is gendered no matter who the target of that violence is, right? When Ida B. Wells stood up against lynchings, she was standing up, right, precisely because of the way gender violence puts a target on the backs of Black men, and standing in solidarity with ending gender oppression that makes that possible. So I just want to frame the kind of Geneva focus stories around that premise that historically the fight against police terror and misogynistic violence today and historically are one and the same, and they have been led by Black queer women along with many other sectors of the working class for the entirety of US's history. And part of the reason I think this is important to share here and important for our struggle for police accountability and against racist policing in Geneva has to do with, I don't know, like what I might call recent histories of feminism, or maybe the end of the 20th century version of feminism, which Angela Davis and others have called a carceral feminism. This is the one that we're not, right? The version that says, right, forces that question over and over and over again. But don't we need police? Because we need someone to save us from rapists. We need someone to save us from domestic abusers. And in order to understand where that question comes from, we can look lots of different places historically, but one place we could just look is the end of the second wave feminist movement. Right, these are people who are fighting to bring an end to gender-based violence, sexual assault, harassment, and domestic violence. But they, but they were doing so in a context of conservative backlash in the 70s. And, right, this is the era of the war on drugs, the welfare queen, and the starting point for the country's soaring rates of incarceration. And they made a bad call, a horrific call, right, to gain popular support for their cause in partnership with police. These groups helped push through policies like mandatory arrest statutes, where police are required to make an arrest if they have reason to believe domestic violence has occurred. And the thing we know in Geneva that's happened as a result of that is it is very often not the abuser themselves who are arrested, but their victim, criminalized and punished. These laws have had precisely the wrong impact. We've seen a decrease in the number of abused women who kill their partners in self-defense, but no decrease in the number of abusers who kill their partners. I think that should tell us something about who the law works for and who the police work for. So, how do feminists fighting for, with, and as working class women respond to those hand-wringers who would claim that we need police to punish rapists? Well, part of the answer is to say most rapists will never see the inside of a courtroom, let alone a conviction. 2/3 of the people who experience sexual violence never report it to anyone, and those who file police reports are almost always dissatisfied with the results. Police officers themselves commit sexual assault alarmingly often. A study in 2010 found that sexual misconduct was the second most frequent reported form of police misconduct. In 2015, the Buffalo News found that an officer was caught for sexual misconduct every 5 days.
Wow.
There are currently hundreds of lawsuits against police departments across the country alleging a culture we know to exist, one of institutionalized negligence and outright hostility toward survivors. We need think only of the hundreds of thousands of untested rape kits all across this country to know that's true. And beyond the structural violence endemic to policing, police themselves are 4 times more likely than the average person to be domestic abusers. So far from being protected, it's under the guise of fighting crime that Black women, trans women, Indigenous, undocumented, and poor women have been subjected to a system of violent policing that continually exposes them to gender-based harm at the same time as it hems them into the margins of society. I just want to share here a quote from Andrea Ritchie, who says, "White supremacy demands such complete control of Black." And again, we know that's true here. We hear it in our classrooms, we hear it in the streets, we certainly see it on social media, the version where just by being out, just by raising voices, Black women are called out of control and criminalized. So Geneva Women's Assembly came into being in early 2017 in a wave of women's demonstrations. You might remember after the election of Donald Trump, we saw a massive march on Washington organized by the Women's March, and millions upon millions upon millions of women worldwide came out into the streets. And part of what we saw then here in Geneva were 2 things, right? One, it didn't seem right that women should have to go all the way to DC to protest. There's plenty of work to be done here. And we also saw the character of that new movement. And it seemed to us really, really important that we help build not that kind of carceral feminism, not that kind of white feminism, not that kind of lean-in feminism, but a real feminism for the 99%.
Yes, ma'am.
So GWA decided not to silo ourselves with a focus on, I don't know, what's often called traditional women's issues, and instead ask ourselves the question, what would our country look like, and what would our community look like if it had billions of extra dollars, those billions of dollars we spend on policing and militarism, to spend instead on housing, food, and education? What would Geneva look like if instead of dedicating nearly $5 million of the city budget to policing, we used it to solve the problems plaguing everyday Genevans? There's a lack of childcare here.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
There's a food desert in this whole side of the city. Transportation is inadequate and poorly timed. And the lack of youth activities and quality jobs means that Geneva isn't thriving in the ways it could be if we had that $5 million for the police.
Yes! Come on! Let them